Co assumed the duties as the Health, Safety, and Work-Life Service Center Chief Operational Medical Division in July 2020. He is the lead technical and professional authority for the Coast Guard's medical care system and charged with inspecting and supervising the delivery of medical care across all Coast Guard clinics, shore sick bays, and cutter sick bays. Captain Co previously served as the senior medical executive for the 9th District, ensuring all Coast Guard medical for 6,000 personnel. He was instrumental in 9th District's early COVID-19 risk mitigation procedures, including duties as a flight surgeon at Air Station Traverse City and Air Station Detroit. Captain Co graduated from the University of California at Irvine with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and received his Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine degree in 1996 from Western University of Health Sciences in Pomona, California, as a recipient of the U.S. Navy Health Professions Scholarship Program. He completed the UC Irvine's Dino County Medical Center Family Medicine Residency in 1999, and he is married to his wife Patty for over 25 years, and together they have 4 beautiful daughters. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Captain Co.
Thank you very much, Commander. So first off, I want to say thank you for this opportunity to present this information. And second off, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties that we've been having. We had a slight electrical fire at the Main Street Tower where Hisville Service Center is at, and we have been without power for the last couple of days, so I'm telecommuting, and the dry run that we had was in the office setting and not the home setting, so bear with us with the technical challenges, but I think I've got it figured out. So today's conversation will be on all things COVID, and as I've learned over the past several months, the basics is some of the items that I want to really go over so that everyone has an understanding of what COVID is, what our limitations are, and what things that we can do to prevent the further spread and to maintain our health and sanity in the COVID pandemic. So this is the current stats as of last night. So globally, there's been an increase of 5% in cases over the past 14 days. And the death rate actually increased 12%. And the daily, the rolling average is about 11,000 deaths. So that's a huge number worldwide. Now, more specifically for the Coast Guard, we have currently 198 active cases, over 1,300 confirmed cases as a cumulative total, and then over almost 1,200 that are in quarantine as of today. So that provides you with a glimpse of the numbers that we are dealing with. While it's not as high as nationally or as worldwide, when you talk about 1,200 members that are in quarantine and 198 that are currently with active cases, so they're in isolation, that's a pretty substantial number that we have to deal with as a way forward. And it all depends on the unit that it impacts. So this one is, I want to present the idea and concepts of the COVID virus pandemic as a speeding ticket. And I know that every one of us that drives, we've sped somewhere in our lifetime, maybe even today coming into work or when we go home. And there are a couple items that actually go along well with the examples that I'm going to go over. So imagine COVID-19 as a speeding ticket. So the SARS-CoV-2 virus is law enforcement. COVID-19 is the disease, so that's like the ticket. And what we're trying to do is avoid being caught by law enforcement and getting a ticket. So we don't want to catch the virus that leads to the disease. And as I said earlier, everyone that drives at some point will speed, but not everyone gets a ticket. And there are many steps that you can take to not get that ticket. And in that world of COVID, there are many tools that are out there that we can do, but nothing is ever absolute that says you will not get this or that. And just like a speeding ticket, there is a variety of responses that can happen. One's a ticket, you can get pulled over and not get a ticket, you could actually get away, it could be bad enough that you could be arrested, it could get into car accidents, leading to death. And the analogy for that with the COVID virus is it's the same things. So when it's nothing, so if you get pulled over but nothing else happens, you don't get a ticket, it's more like the asymptomatic. You could have mild cases like a cold where you can't smell or taste but otherwise feel well. You could have moderate symptoms that are more like flu and you're in the bed and you felt like you've been run over by a bus. It could be severe, leading to hospitalizations, intubations, ICU care, and sometimes it could even be death. And just like certain cases, you know, sometimes like a teenager, if one of my daughters got pulled over, I guarantee you she'd be traumatized for a very long time. What we're finding is even healthy individuals can be exposed to the COVID virus, catch the disease, and then subsequently have symptoms that are lasting for months on end. And that's part of the issues with the COVID viruses that we're talking about in terms of what are the long-term effects that we're having to deal with. Now, fortunately, we haven't had as many positives that lead to, you know, deaths or intubations. We have had a couple that were serious, but not as much as you would think. But the what we call the morbidity or the side effects from having that disease and impacting an individual's fitness overall is substantial. So I've got people that are triathletes that are very, very active and healthy prior to COVID, but once they get it, they've been having shortness of breath with just regular routine day-to-day activities like just walking from the parking lot in. And it took them months to recover from that. So the consequences of having the virus, while you might have mild to moderate symptoms, it still could potentially impact your abilities to serve on active duty for the short term. And so everyone needs to be aware that just because it's not that bad doesn't mean there's not any consequences. And in the analogy, as the title says, this officer is not your typical officer. It's not like getting a typical speeding ticket. The quirk is that they can ticket you for being next to someone. And you may or may not even know that person. You know, it could be a total stranger that you sat to in the bus or in the office or the waiting area. And they can get that person for speeding that was 3 days ago. And in that same sense, these individuals that we're exposed to, they may look healthy today, but if they're spreading or shedding the viruses, they're infectious up to about 2 to 3 days prior to presentation of symptoms. And that's what makes this virus so hard to differentiate, because you can't just go by the looks of an individual. And as it says there, they can ticket you as a passenger in a speeding car, even if you can't drive. So it doesn't matter. You could be young or old, healthy or unhealthy. You're going to get potentially the virus. So everyone needs to be aware. And because of the potential for spreading based on that 3-day look back when you're not sick, we can't just look at this as, hey, I'm healthy, I'm good to go, and I'm willing to chance it. It's who else are we coming in touch with and in contact with that are at risk. And a lot of the news that's been out there, and it's very true, it's going to be your seniors, those with ongoing medical conditions, nursing homes. Those are critical points within a society that needs to be protected. So how do you avoid catching a COVID ticket? And here are some of the examples, right? Don't drive. Well, comparable to that for COVID is, you know, a true quarantine or isolation. Not some modified versions, but really staying home and not being exposed to anybody else. Don't speed, meaning avoid those infected with the virus so you don't catch the virus. Watch the speed limit. What is the rate of infection within your local community? And is it a high number or is it a low number? Because if you think about it, the higher the number, the chances are that you're going to be exposed is substantially higher as well. So you know, again, using the speeding analogy, the chance of getting a ticket increases because there's more police officers that are looking to give you a ticket. Use radar detectors. So this is, my analogy for that is more along the using the mask appropriately, washing hands frequently, just really doing all the little things that we talk about to prevent the further spread. And there's a lot of controversy about the benefits of a mask, but I can tell you it does provide a level of protection from both getting and spreading. So these are the things that we want to look into really performing on a regular basis. And then the final one is a big one, and we just got this coming out. That's the you can't give me a ticket card, and that's to get vaccinated. And I'll go over that as well. So, in summary, the more often you speed, you increase the chance of a speeding ticket. The more often you go out and expose yourself to viruses or those that potentially could have been exposed, you're taking that chance and the chance increases. It doesn't matter that you always speed and never got a ticket, because eventually you will get one. So you can't use the historical fact that I haven't been sick as a reason to go out and attend a party or a gathering or go to that bar or whatnot. It also doesn't matter that everyone else is speeding. Just because everyone else is and they haven't gotten sick doesn't mean that you won't. And that concept still holds true for the COVID exposure risk. So again, it's typical, the Murphy's Law type of thing. That, the one time that you didn't do it, that one time you didn't take that precaution, the one time you went to that bar, the one time you went to that gathering, the chances of you getting it is substantial enough that you may possibly get it. And again, use all the tools that are available to you to avoid getting COVID. And in the medical sense, nothing that we recommend is an absolute. There's no guarantees, even with the vaccine, and I'll go over that. But every little bit that we do does provide and afford that level of protection that allows you to go about doing more activities. So there, I know, again, there's a lot of controversy about indoor activities, restaurants and bars, gatherings. And there are manners that you can do it safely, but what I ask everyone to do is not to take that unnecessary risk, and always think about not just yourself, but those people that are around you that would potentially be impacted. And again, as what I said earlier, it's going to be more of our senior populations, those that are in nursing homes, and those that have a medical condition that puts them at a higher risk. So, as I said earlier, prevention is key. And that's an important aspect of COVID control. Testing. This has been an ongoing topic, and it's not just military specific. This is across the spectrum, that we have been as a society accustomed to having, hey, there's a test. If I get an answer, it's an absolute. And unfortunately, the testings that we have, while they're good, they're not perfect in any sense. And the statistics are actually very, the first time I saw it, I was really alarmed. And so we've used it enough to tell you that it works to at least provide us the information, but it's not an absolute. Just because it's negative doesn't mean it's a negative. Just because it's a positive doesn't mean it's a positive. So a couple of things I want to go over. The antigen-based testing, in the Coast Guard, we have the Binacs now. They're very good at picking up disease when one is symptomatic. It's not as good when they're not symptomatic. So a positive is reliable, but a negative, we need to double check it. It's sort of like the strep test that we have out there. And some of you might have actually had these tests, but if we do the quick test that's in the lab, when that comes back positive, I'm fairly reassured that you have strep. However, if it comes back negative, I can't say you don't have strep, so I send it off for an actual culture. And in that same sense, with the Binacs now antigen-based testing, a positive I will believe, a negative I'll be less likely to believe, so I want that double checked. And current guidelines for even testing out of a diagnosis, if you want to think of it, would be having two negative antigen-based tests spread out over at least 24 hours before I can say confidently, hey, you most likely don't. But again, it's not something that's a perfect tool, so we have to be careful in what setting that we use that for. The PCR, or polymerase chain reaction-based testing that we have, they're much more sensitive, but still there's an accuracy problem. The false negative rates before symptom onset is high as 67%. Who likes those kind of odds? The best you're gonna get is 3 days after symptom onset at 20% false negative. So again, when you look at these test values, you have to be really careful not to overly be confident in the responses that, or actually the results that we get, and say, this is my decision based on this test alone. Also, with the high sensitivity PCR testing, there can be cases of false positives, and it's primarily at the end of a disease process where it picks up the virus, the viral particles, but they're not infectious. So it's positive, but doesn't mean they're infectious. So again, unless we know where you are in that spectrum of disease, we can't tell you with certainty whether you are or are not, because we have this test that's very, very sensitive to that. So the vaccine. Right now, Pfizer is first up with their FDA submission, and Moderna was closely followed after that. They are both a 2-shot series. Pfizer is 21 days apart, and Moderna is 28 days. The efficacy or the effectiveness of it is approximately 49 to 50 days after your first dose, assuming you complete that two-shot series. The temperature control, the Pfizer vaccine is very, very sensitive and needs to be transported at minus 80 degrees Celsius. That equates to minus 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So not a lot of our facilities, both in the DoD or the Coast Guard, have that capacity, except for research settings. And our Coast Guard pharmacy lead, Commander Keller, was proactive, very proactive, in fact, that he was able to push along a purchase of 21 of these ultra-low freezers, and we've got them placed around the country so that once we get a full complement of our vaccination supply to us, we'll be able to reach over 80% of the Coast Guard using the sources that we have. So with these special controls, what happens is the temperature needs to be maintained, and Pfizer developed their own transportation storage devices that can actually act as a short-term storage for up to 5 days utilizing dry ice. So it gives you a certain level of flexibility, but it's not anywhere near like flu or the other vaccines that everyone's used to. The temperature controls will be our biggest hurdle that we have to go over in terms of the reach to all the 80% and then to 100% of the Coast Guard. At this moment, because of the vaccine storage capability that the Coast Guard has, we're actually well positioned within that DoD DHA construct to accept the vaccines. And in fact, one of our 21 freezers was loaned out to Naval Medical Center Portsmouth to support their establishment as a vaccine recipient site for them to provide for the DoD as well. So we're well positioned to get the vaccines, and because of the history of or actually the processes that we've had and the experiences that we have with vaccine rollouts in general, the shot itself is nothing different than any other shots that we've had. It's just the time constraints are a little bit different. So I can reassure everyone here that the process is being looked at very, very carefully. What we're trying to do is really minimize vaccine loss due to storage issues or transportation issues, because it's such a high value commodity at this point. So that's being worked out with tabletop exercises, left and right, and making sure and double checking and triple checking. So we are well positioned to receive. We have plans in place to vaccinate. The part of the equation that we really don't know is how many we're getting. For the first rollout with Pfizer, they are sending it out in quantities of 975 doses. There is no change in that. There is nothing higher or lower, but everything is in intervals of 975. And whether they give us one shipment of 975 or 10 shipments of 975, we don't know what we're getting. But we will follow a special protocol that's set up through the DHA and the CDC's recommendations for tiered processing of who gets, I should say, who should get them first. And then the DCMS is also coming up with a rank order, if you want to think of it, of which units should be getting these limited supply of vaccines. Now, with time, the quantity of vaccinations that we're able to provide will increase substantially. And that's where the Moderna vaccine comes into play. The Moderna vaccine is, like I said, it's a 2-shot series, but their temperature controls are, it's a little bit different. It's a lot less restrictive. It's at minus 20 degrees Celsius, which our current freezers are able to accommodate. And we've also purchased portable storage devices that do maintain temperatures minus 20 degrees Celsius and allows us to transport with a controlled environmental control to the white spaces and those locations that don't have an on-site organic Coast Guard support. So utilizing those two sources, I feel very confident that we'll be able to reach the majority of our Coast Guard men and women to provide them the vaccination. Now, one key point is these two vaccines that are first up anyway, they're not interchangeable. So if you are given the Pfizer vaccine, your second shot has to be Pfizer. And same with Moderna. If it's the Moderna you get, you have to close out with Moderna. These two vaccines, because it's such a unknown quantity and it's a new and emerging technology, it's under the emergency use authorization. So at this moment will not be mandatory. I know that the Coast Guard leadership and the DoD leadership is looking to work around this. And once we get final confirmation on where we're at with that, we'll have everything out there and we'll let people know. But at this moment, my understanding is there is not going to be a presidential order requiring this as a mandatory vaccine like the other items like flu. But that's, we'll have to wait and see what happens. And for the PAC area, kudos to you guys. You are #1 on our list. You made the cut. And base Alameda will be the one of the first sites to get these COVID vaccines, followed by Portsmouth. So what is this vaccine? So it is a messenger RNA vaccine. And what's so different is this is new. And in the realm of what we're talking about, you know, new is the idea and concepts have been around for about 30 years, but we've never had this work. And so what the messenger RNA does is the messenger RNA utilizes your cells to create what we call spike proteins of this virus. So the spike protein is then made by your body, released into your body, and then your immune system says, hey, I don't know what you are, but you shouldn't be here. And it starts to take effect and creates natural vaccine and immunity to that spike protein. Again, it's a very new process. They've only had about 140,000 doses, but fortunately, there's been no safety concerns. So a couple of things. This is not a live vaccine. You cannot catch COVID. It's literally what we call that spike protein. So it's like a piece of that virus. It's like saying, here's a car with very special rims. And what we're doing is we're having the body recreate that very specific rim, which then your body's natural immune system picks up and says, this is not good for us, and we're going to get rid of it with our own immune system. So it's a very safe vaccine based on the information that's been provided. It's also very effective, 95% effective. And even that remaining 5% that do get it, what they found was that they're not as severe. So what are some of the side effects that have been reported? And it's things that we actually kind of anticipated. Injection site pain. A lot of the descriptions are more like, you know, getting a tetanus shot. There is reports of tiredness or fatigue, muscle joint pains, some mild fevers, and all that kind of goes along with, you know, your typical immune response that your body has to that unknown object, which is that spike protein. Majority of the individuals have had these symptoms for anywhere from, you know, a day to 2 or 3 days out. We're still waiting for the full package insert release to provide more information, and we'll provide more guidances. I think I lost you.
You're still there, Kevin.
Okay, good. Sorry. So the side effects is, you know, again, injection site pain, fatigue, muscle aches and fevers and joint pains. Nothing really harsh, nothing that indicates that people will have major issues. Not that it doesn't happen. There have been some data that was released, and I'll get to that number as well. So we're waiting for the DoD guidance. Coast Guard will provide their own information on who within our services will be getting it. At this moment, dependents will receive through the community resources. Right now, we're working on our men and women in uniform and also our civilian workforce. And as I said earlier, it's a tiered process, and first up will be the healthcare workers and those that are in nursing home residents, followed by workers that are in essential and critical industries. Again, that definition is, it's up for debate in terms of how we could apply it for our workforce because we fit into that category as well. And then also people that are at high risk for underlying medical conditions, and then those that are over 65 years old. So Pfizer's phase 3 study, they had 41,000 participants. They had 170 confirmed COVID cases. Of that, 162 received placebo. So that tells you that, this is very effective. And those 8 that did receive the vaccine, unfortunately got sick with COVID, but 162 people did not. And there were no major complications from the COVID that were reported. So those are all good things. How long will this vaccination be effective? We don't know. Keep in mind, this is relatively new. COVID has been in our terminology for actually first identified in November, so a little over a year, but really not on the radar for the world until February of this year. So there's a lot of unknowns in terms of how long this immunity will last. It could be months or it could be many, many years. Only time will tell. The additional items in terms of this rapid rollout is once we start to immunize more and more people, we're going to get more and more data that tells us, hey, these are the expected side effects, these are the expected complications, and we basically will learn as we go along. But the benefits of the vaccine, as far as what we've seen so far to date, has been pretty substantial. And with a 95% efficacy rate, it's definitely worthwhile getting it. It's the don't give me the vaccine, or don't give me the COVID virus, get out of jail card, if you want to call it, that allows you to be very protective. Some questions that have come up, if I've been exposed to COVID, what should I do? And what we're finding and recommending at this point is, again, because we don't know how long that natural immunity is, the current guidelines are, if you've been COVID positive in the past, we recommend that you still get the vaccine to verify that you don't have the issues. So sort of like with chickenpox and shingles. Shingles is a variant of chickenpox that comes up that's latent. We still recommend people to get the shingles vaccinations at a certain point. And, you could think of it as, is that a reinfection? We know from the natural immunity things it works. And so in that same idea, if you've had the COVID before, we know you have some level of immunity. We just don't know what that extent is. So the recommendation is to get the vaccine. The other parts of the question that I was receiving is, are there any concerns with this in terms of religious issues, fetal parts or tissues being utilized? I can't tell you on the development over the past 30 years if that's ever been used. However, from what I've learned so far in the manufacturing process, there are no fetal tissues that have been utilized, and it has been deemed safe from that aspect. Should you get a sickness, whether it's COVID or something similar to it like influenza, should you get the vaccine? And my recommendations for that, again, I assume it's going to be the same thing when it officially rolls out, is just like any other vaccine, we don't want to get you vaccinated when you're ill. So when you're actively having the disease of any sorts, it'll be best to delay getting the vaccination. Relative to those that are pregnant or breastfeeding, really not enough information is out there to give a strong support. So the current guidelines, I imagine, will be not to provide the vaccination for those that are pregnant or breastfeeding. And that's something that we'll just have to keep a close eye on. And again, as more of this information is received, we'll find out more. A lot of the vaccine development, it's proprietary, so they hold off on releasing any of these pertinent informations until it's actually approved by the FDA. And even then, because of the numbers, only 41,000 for Pfizer, that's really not enough to give a very strong recommendation for or against. So anytime we are dealing with pregnant or with infants, we always err on the side of caution. So my anticipation is that it will not be recommended for those that are pregnant or breastfeeding. So how do you survive this world of COVID? Number one, there, that planning and preparing, that's key. So it's being, informed, knowing what you're dealing with, knowing what you have to do, making those decisions on a basis of individuality, and knowing that who you might potentially infect. You have to know all those things. And, for a lot of people, and this is what gets us into trouble, is, we think we know it and we take these risks without realizing what the true risks are. So I encourage you to, read up on things, replay this on video if you have to, but there's a lot of information that's out there, and the CDC is really good at having that on their COVID page as well. But be informed about the virus, be informed about what's out in the community, be informed about the tools we have available to really mitigate that risk of exposure. Health-wise, as Vice Admiral Fagan alluded to earlier, exercises is a critical point. And you can do exercise safely, indoors or outdoors. It's just that we have to be careful to keep it a common sense approach. So if you go to a hot yoga session and it's a fully crowded, like a pre-COVID type environment, I can guarantee you that's not a very good environment to be in terms of that risk exposure. So think about the ideas in terms of where you are and how you'll do the activities you plan on doing. But don't let the COVID be a reason to skip exercise. There's lots of ways of doing it. Outdoors is preferred, but when you're indoors by yourself, it's not such a big issue. Out here in Virginia Beach and Michigan right now, it's kind of cold, so outdoors is less likely, but things are possible in terms of going out and doing things. Hiking is another great activity you can do to get out there. But again, the reason why I say hiking is because there's less likely for you to run into crowds. But if you go out and it's a large or it's a popular environment and there's tons of people that are walking about, then you elevate your risk. So think about where you're going, how you'll be doing it, and what you do to mitigate that risk. But don't let it be an automatic, if there's COVID, so I don't want to go out and do this, or don't do that. Be creative. There are ways around things. It's just that you want to know your risk before you take that chance. Some of the more obvious things to avoid, large groups. And the reason for that is the larger the group, the more number of people that are potentially infectious to pass the disease on. So avoiding large groups is going to be a key component to mitigating this risk. Bars and clubs. It's not necessarily the bars and clubs aspect, it's what happens when you are at a bar or a club. It's that intimate contact, it's the closeness, it's indoors, a lot of conversing, a lot of, potentially singing and whatnot. Those are avenues of aerosolizing these particles to further, spread the disease. So be mindful of the environment that you're in. Recommend not yelling indoors and not singing indoors in large groups. Those are the things that we have to be careful with. Indoor dining is another one. You have to take caution with it because, again, you are indoors. And even if they do the proper COVID spacing, you're still indoors and people are eating and people are talking, and it's another avenue of getting the virus out into the air and to be breathed in. So you want to be really, really careful about that kind of setting. On the mental health front, and we see this a lot, it's connecting with family and friends. And so you want to do this virtually. You want to do this from a distance if possible, but do something to maintain that level of connection with your family and friends. There was a point earlier in this process when I started this job in July. My family's still in Michigan, so I'm a geo bachelor in Virginia Beach, and I was driving back after having been in Virginia for 3 weeks. And during my drive, I was thinking back like, man, when's the last time I touched somebody? Touched. So, during my drive to Virginia, during my time at the office at Hiswell, during my time shopping for food, getting takeouts, when was the last time I actually physically touched somebody? And the answer for me on that drive was The last time I touched somebody was my family when I left them 3 weeks ago. And that then got me going into terms of looking at the people that are out there, like our single families, or, you know, single families, single members that are away from their family and loved ones. That human touch component that as a social being that we all are, now, albeit some people prefer not to be touched or have any interactions with people, but, you know, the majority of us do. If you think back, that could be a huge added isolation component, right? Not to be able to touch somebody with even just a simple handshake or a quick hug. And so those are all things that we need to overcome in this environment. And so realizing that we can't do those, you know, pre-COVID hugs and long handshakes and close talking, find creative ways to go out and make those connections with your family and friends. Next on, use the mask and hand sanitizers. I cannot express that enough in terms of using it when you're not in your bubble. And the bubble is, you know, your home, your close and intimate family members and friends, if they live with you. Outside of that, everyone else is outside of the bubble. You need to be really careful with who you are. So always maintain that level of protection with masks and using hand sanitizers after any interactions. Last one is having a positive outlook. That's an important aspect of it, because right now, you know, believe it or not, we're coming up on 9 months. It'll be a year soon, and then, you know, COVID. Who knows what's going to happen in 21? I have no idea. The pessimist in me says one thing, and the optimist says another. And right now, it's a 50-50 split. Hate to think that way, but what you need to do is realize, you know, we've come a long ways in terms of where we are today versus where we were even 9 months ago. And with the advent of the vaccine, it provides another light to shine at the end of this tunnel that says, hey, we're coming to that point where we're making a huge stride in getting controls over this environment so that we can go back to the pre-COVID world. And every little bit that we do to contribute to that control is going to be a critical point. So having everyone do the right thing, you know, getting the vaccinations, you know, minimizing the exposures, maintaining control of your activities will add to that. And over the long run, we will overcome this. I guarantee that. It's just right now, it seems like it's so far away, but I'm guaranteeing that we will get over this with all the things that we have going. And the last bit there is, you know, travel cautiously. In my job, I have had to travel both in the car and by plane. By far, car travel is much more controlled and much more less exposure, because I control everything when I travel by car. But having said that, in terms of air travel, we know that it can be done safely. There's been studies that within the airplane, because of their filtering system, in a large wide body aircraft, it's something like 54 hours of flight experience or flight time before you're at a significant level for exposure. So it could be done safely. The problem is, I don't know what that person next to me has been doing. I don't know where the level of exposure could be. I don't know the level of exposure in the terminal area when people are waiting or going through the check-in process. So there's a lot of unknowns within that air travel components. So again, going back, I urge you to think about what you can do to avoid certain aspects of your day-to-day activities, but at the same time, don't be afraid to participate. Just be cautious and take all the tools that are available to you to limit your exposure. All righty, that comes to the end of my presentation. And I saw some questions going along, but I don't have, let me see if I have any.
Yes,
Did anyone have questions?
I can read them to you, sir. There's a couple that came in. So one of the questions was, will there be an opportunity to test for antibodies before we get the vaccine?
Right now, there is no program set up because we're not sure what the level of antibodies will tell us, whether you're actually, at what quantity you're immune or whatnot. But I suspect that as more and more studies go out, that will come into play. Again, because it's such a new process, we're still learning. And the reasons why we can get away with antibody testing for the other disease processes and vaccines is because we have a lot of historical facts to support it. But right now we don't, but I anticipate that that is a definite tool that's going to be on the horizon.
Thank you, sir. There's you may have answered this one. What happens if you catch COVID in between the vaccine doses?
If you catch it, then we go ahead and deal with the process, but you would still have to finish out the vaccination protocol. So it's a 2-shot series still. The only thing I would imagine, if you were to catch it, then we would just delay your second shot until you're no longer symptomatic. But some of the studies were done in terms of, and I don't know how it might have happened, but they gave more than the standard dose of the vaccine, and they've reported no side effects or concerns from having that over exposure to the vaccine itself.
So there's another question here. Can Captain Ko give his opinion on the soon-to-be released, is it California CA Notify app for contact tracing?
I do not have any information on that, so I can't. I know that we're trying to get something out from a Coast Guard perspective through the DHS process as well, so that we have a better control of things. But specifically for the California app, I unfortunately don't have the information on that one. My apologies.
Okay. Another question here. Can you be a carrier after vaccinated?
Right now, the states, the information that we have is that we don't know, but we suspect that you will not be. But again, because we have such a few number, we really don't know. The likelihood is not, based on other vaccines, but science, medicine is never an exact science, so there's always that exception. So until we get more and more information, I can't say definitively that you won't. But is there a chance that you could be? I would say there's a slight chance, but more often it's in the realm of having been vaccinated and you just didn't take the vaccine up and you're no longer immune, and now you're posing as a carrier of sorts.
Yes, sir. Another question here. Are messenger RNA vaccines safe for those with autoimmune diseases?
Right now, for those with autoimmune diseases, we have to be careful, but the safety profile so far indicates that it is safe, but there is a package warning for those with autoimmune to be cautious.
Okay.
But realizing how... No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
So I was going to say, realizing how the vaccine works, it's messenger RNA, so there's no... The concept, if you think about it, there's no harm in having this spike protein being built within your body, because it's not the virus, so you won't catch a disease. But because there's so many unknowns, I can't say definitively that's going to be an issue, but I would say from that concept perspective, those with autoimmune diseases should be fine taking the vaccination.
Okay, yes, sir. I know we're getting up on time here. I've got 2 last questions before we close it out. So one is, with vaccines being optional at this time, is there any incentive for getting vaccines to help people on the fence make a decision with regard to the get out of ticket card, what's in it for me mentality?
That is going to be, so again, so policy-wise and how the Coast Guard leadership will take things, it's going to be hard to gauge how everyone does. But what's in it for me concept is, it depends on who you are and who you care about, right? So if you have loved ones at home that are ill, if you have loved ones that you get in touch with or exposed to, it's going to protect others. For the individual that's focused on, what's truly just for me as far as, the benefits of this, a lot of it I can tell you is more along the cutter lifestyle. Right now for our cutter crews that are going underway, fancy port calls and exciting places, but because of COVID, really curtails the abilities to enjoy that benefit. I could theoretically see where a CEO can say something like, if you don't have COVID vaccine, we're going to put you in ROM and we're going to put these limitations or restrictions or whatnot. Again, that's just Harry Ko talking. That's not some CEO talking out loud or the leadership saying this is our plan. But when you talk about the risk of exposures, that's certainly something that's worthwhile to look into as a potential way of getting motivated to do something.
And the last question here, sir. Has there been any discussion on long-term effects with this type of vaccine mRNA?
There has not. But again, with the concept of, it's been, like I said, it's been in the development phase for 30 years. It just hasn't been rolled out in this manner for this large of a population. So we don't really know the true side effects, but the concept of the vaccine and how it works, as Admiral said earlier, I think this is the way to go for a lot of the vaccines that are out there. Literally, this is just a particle, a protein particle that's a part of and uniqueness to that particular virus that your body will start making these antibodies to. So I think the concept in terms of how safe it is, I would have more faith in this being safe than the current concepts of what we have now with actual viral particles that are out there that are being injected.
All right, Captain, I know, I think that brings us to the end of all the questions. Thank you so much for your informative presentation. And I know you're very busy, sir, so thank you for your time.